Welcome back to the course. When is it useful to use creativity methods in the teaching? The best way to develop previously mentioned skills is to apply project-based learning or problem-based learning within the study process. So, what are the differences between them? First of all, it is worth to mention that they have many similarities. Both focus on an open-ended question or task. Provide authentic application of content and skills. Build 21st century success skills. Emphasize student independence and inquiry. Are longer and more multifaceted than traditional lessons or assignments. But the differences make them unique. Project-based learning can involve interdisciplinary work, while problem-based learning is generally implemented in just one class and lasts a few days at most. Contrary to popular belief, problem-based learning is not any easier to implement than project-based learning, as it also requires the teacher to become a supportive, adaptable facilitator. In problem-based learning, teachers can set goals and outcomes jointly with students, whereas in project-based learning, the objectives are usually established by the teacher beforehand. Moreover, both project-based learning and problem-based learning are centered on real-world problems, though problem-based learning can be more abstract in classes like math. One last thing, you can access problem-based learning just like you would for project-based learning, but it's far easier to construct rubrics as you go, focusing on a select numbers of skills for each batch of problems. So, when is it best to implement project-based learning versus problem-based learning? Let's analyze them both more in depth. Project-based learning is a successful approach that addresses some of these challenges and needs. Project-based learning is a comprehensive approach to teaching and learning that is designed to engage students in the investigation of authentic problems. Students become active learners and participate in hands-on activities, while lecturers provide guidance to students during their project work. The project-based learning method of learning and teaching thus requires a new mindset and a change in role for both students and teachers. Researchers have proven that this method increases students' motivation and allows them to apply their theoretical knowledge in an interactive environment where they discuss concepts with each other and also with staff. Students learn to research and define the problem clearly, explore the solution space for more than a single solution, and learn to iterate and improve their designs to arrive at an appropriate solution that meets the objectives. Students learn the key skills of problem solving progressively, starting with simpler applications through and more complex problem solving. So, when is project-based learning worth your while? Project-based learning involves an increased number of standards and time dedicated to learning. It's also exceptionally easy to incorporate in a variety of content areas and interdisciplinary connections through project-based learning. In New Utrecht High School, for instance, students dove into the intriguing world of tourism and worked with the following guiding question. What makes a place a destination? They then created marketing strategies and even a website for their client country. Do you want another example? At Arise Academy, students used a variety of different media outlets to present a civil rights topic of their choice to a panel of judges who asked difficult questions about the choices they made. Such projects help you teach 21st century skills such as collaboration or oral communication, making learning meaningful to students. Don't forget to incorporate extra time for feedback throughout the project uh, for the students to reflect and for you to apply continuous assessment. Student learning goals for projects include standards-based content, as well as skills such as critical thinking, problem solving, communication, self-management, project management, and collaboration. What is gold standard project-based learning? To help teachers do project-based learning well, here is a comprehensive research-informed model for project-based learning to help teachers, schools, and organizations improve, calibrate, and assess their practice. In gold standard project-based learning, projects are focused on students acquiring key knowledge, understanding, and success skills. It covers a challenging problem or question. The project is framed by a meaningful problem to be solved or a question to answer at the appropriate level of challenge. Sustained inquiry. Students engage in a rigorous, extended process of posing questions, finding resources, and applying information. Authenticity. The project involves a real-world context, tasks and tools, quality standards or impact, or the project speakers to personal concerns, interests, and issues in the student's life. Student voice and choice. Students make some decisions about the project, including how they work and what they create, and express their own ideas in their own voice. Reflection. Students and teachers reflect on the learning, the effectiveness of their inquiry and project activities, the quality of student work, and obstacles that arise and strategies for overcoming them. Critique and revision. Students give, receive, and apply feedback to improve their process and products. Public product, where students make their project work public by sharing it with an explaining or presenting it to people beyond the classroom. When transitioning to project-based learning, one of the biggest hurdles for many teachers is the need to give up some degree of control over the classroom and trust in their students. But even though they are more often the guide on the side than the sage on the stage, this most certainly does not mean that teachers don't teach in a project-based learning classroom. Many traditional practices remain, but are reframed in the context of a project. So what is a gold standard for project-based learning? To help teachers do project-based learning well, researchers created a comprehensive research-informed model for project-based learning to help teachers, schools, and organizations measure, calibrate, and improve their practice. In gold standard project-based learning, projects are focused on students acquiring key knowledge, understanding, and success skills. So the most important is to design and plan. Teachers create or adapt a project for their context and students and plan its implementation from launch to culmination while allowing for some degree of students' voice and choice. Align to standards. Teachers use standards to plan the project and make sure it addresses key knowledge and understanding from subject areas to be included. Build a culture. Teachers explicitly and implicitly promote students' independence and growth, open-ended inquiry, team spirit, and attention to quality. Manage activities. Teachers work with students to organize tasks and schedules, Set checkpoints and deadlines, find and use resources, create products, and make them public. Scaffold student learning. Teachers employ a variety of lessons, tools, and instructional strategies to support all students in reaching project goals. Assess student learning. Teachers use formative and summative assessment of knowledge, understanding, and success skills, and include self and peer assessment of team and individual work. Engage and coach. Teachers engage in learning and creating alongside students and identify when they need skill building, redirection, encouragement, and celebration. So, how to create authentic learning environments in the classroom? First of all, provide authentic context that reflect the way the knowledge will be used in real life. Then provide access to expert performances and the modeling of processes. Provide multiple roles and perspectives. Support collaborative construction of knowledge. Promote reflection to enable abstractions to be formed. Promote articulation to enable tacit knowledge to be made explicit. Provide coaching and scaffolding at critical times. Provide for authentic assessment of learning within the tasks. Now watch this video.
You remember what it was like in school. It was boring. You sat in class, memorized as much as you could, and tried to pass a test at the end. But is that good enough? These days, school can be more interesting and effective by focusing students on work that matters. This is project-based learning explained. Most adults live in a world of projects. Whether it's a job assignment, home improvement, or planning a wedding, we need to actively solve problems. But unfortunately, schoolwork looks more like this than this. Let's take a look at this project-based world. Meet Claire. She was recently presented with a challenge. Her company, Super Suds, makes soap, and it was up to her to find the most earth-friendly way to produce it in the future. Her boss gave her a budget and a few requirements, and it was up to her to come up with a solution. She organized and managed a team who researched the options and created materials summarizing the issues. Claire's team asked for feedback and presented their findings to the boss. Claire came out of the project looking like a rock star, and she learned a lot about green products. If you look closely, Claire's success involved critical thinking, collaboration, and communication, things that aren't often taught in traditional classrooms. The world needs more Claires, so how do we get them? The answer is project-based learning, or PBL. By focusing students on a project, teachers put them on a path that deepens their knowledge and builds skills they'll need in the future. Here's what I mean. Mr. Simmons has always been a good science teacher, and his students do well on Friday's tests. Unfortunately, what they learned was gone by Saturday morning. That wasn't good enough for him. Soon he learned about project-based learning and decided to give it a shot. Mr. Simmons got the idea for his first project on microorganisms when nearly half of his students were suddenly absent with the flu. He asked his students why they thought so many of their classmates got sick at the same time. That lively discussion produced a lot of good questions and a list of things the kids wanted to know. Mr. Simmons then announced their project was to help elementary school kids understand how can we not get sick. After dividing the class into teams, he got them started on the project. It was up to the students to ask questions, research, collaborate, give each other feedback, and figure out the best ways to make their points clear to children. One team chose to make an educational video on the connection between hand washing and avoiding the flu. Another chose to create posters to show how viruses spread. The project teams showed off their final work to an enthusiastic audience of parents and their children at a nearby elementary school. Sitting in the front row was our good friend and local rock star Claire, who saw a bit of herself in the students. It was clear that the project was a success for the students, the audience, and Mr. Simmons. His students practiced critical thinking, collaboration, and communication. The project wasn't about memorization, but learning in depth about viruses and how to prevent spreading disease, a lesson they will never forget. At the end of the presentation, Claire introduced herself to the students and told them that they were rock stars and that the world needs more people who can think like them. To learn more about project-based learning, go to BIE.org.
Time to reflect. You will have 3 minutes to think and answer yourself these questions. What project-based learning tasks have you already implemented? What benefits did you get from these tasks? Did you feel its advantages compared to traditional learning? Of course, you can always switch between project-based learning and problem-based learning, and you can also combine them. Problem-based learning can be implemented for every subtopic you cover. The trick is to create a guiding narrative between each of the different problem sets, constructing an overarching frame for project-based learning. As explained by the Buck Institute of Education in Project-Based Learning Works, project-based learning represents independence and the exploration of meaningful questions, which could also be problem-based learning exercises. This is why exploiting the difference between problem-based learning and project-based learning can make your teaching even more meaningful to your students. Problem-based learning allows you to focus on skills and on the learning process rather than on the product. It works well in classes like math or science where problem solving might teach students more than product refinement. Regarding math, for instance, problem-based learning promotes mathematical habits of mind, which range from curiosity and persistence to finding patterns and generalizing to the use of mathematical language and models to interpret phenomena. How does it work? Problem-based learning often involves a single content area, but it can include other subjects as well. Students use messy problems in the form of case studies or fictitious scenarios. These learning experiences tend to be shorter and follow specific steps that result in the identification of the problem and then working towards a solution or solutions. Finally, students determine and present their solutions to the given problem. Problem-based learning has a very clearly defined structure that must be followed to ensure effectiveness. There are three main components to problem-based learning: fact-finding, idea-finding, and solution-finding. During fact-finding, teachers present a situation, sometimes called a fuzzy situation, that has different problems embedded within, but no explicitly stated. Students read the fuzzy situation and attempt to identify problems. After identifying the problems, students will have a discussion and decide on one particular problem to solve. The group begins to find facts that give some insights to the problem. At this point, students enter the idea-finding stage. The group brainstorms possible solutions, and the teacher or a student representative records the ideas. Students discuss these ideas and expand on them. At this point, the teacher can ask critical thinking questions that lead the students to analyze the situation and possible solutions more in depth. In the solution-finding stage, the group should discuss the merits of pursuing each of the different solutions presented in the brainstorming session. Some things to consider would be how large the impact would be, how relevant the solution is to the problem, how feasible is it, time and money-wise, and how interested in it the students are. The group makes a final decision and the students begin to collect information that will help them to solve the problem they identified.
Problem-based learning in less than 5 minutes, I promise. In the 1980s, somebody decided that haircuts were way too messy. So they combined the hair trimmer and the vacuum cleaner, and we ended up with the Flowbee. And I remember begging my parents for a Flowbee, and they said no because they thought I would use it on the dog, and they were probably right. But the idea there is pretty clear, that you can solve problems in unique ways. And that's the core idea of problem-based learning. Number one, the need for problem-based learning. School exists in a one-size-fits-all factory model where students are expected to passively consume content. But here's the thing, kids aren't widgets, and one-size-fits-all is great for socks but lousy for minds. Kids need to dream and wonder and imagine. They need to design and build and tinker, and they need to think critically and solve complex problems. For years, the model has involved going to school, being compliant, getting into college, and then climbing the corporate ladder. But the ladder is now a maze, and our students need to know how to navigate the complexity of a global society. In other words, students need to be empowered to solve real-world problems. And that's why we have problem-based learning. Number 2, the history of problem-based learning. Problem-based learning began at Case Western University in the 1950s, although it wasn't called that at the time. And the goal was to provide real-world problems for medical students to solve. It soon spread to other medical schools and eventually made its way into business, law, engineering, and education. And by the 1960s, you could find elements of problem-based learning within the new social studies framework of Macialis and Cox, as well as Herbert Thielen's group investigation model. Problem-based learning fits well within the social family of education because of the emphasis on real-world problems and human systems. It's not surprising that many of the problem-based learning theorists cite John Dewey's notion of democratic education, as well as Paulo Freire's concept of critical pedagogy. In other words, kids need to be engaged with solving problems within their world. And here's the description of problem-based learning. There are 4 different phases. Number 1, you present or identify the problem. In some cases, the teacher decides on the problem. In other cases, individual students or the entire classroom community presents the initial problem. Phase number 2, they develop a plan for solving the problem. Here, students work collaboratively in this phase where they figure out what they will do in order to solve the problem. In some cases, it's a really small plan of action, but sometimes they might engage in research, brainstorming, and ideation. And in a few cases, they might even decide to build a product. The next phase is the implementation of the plan. In this phase, students test out their plan to see if they can solve the problem. And then finally, they move to the last phase where they evaluate the implementation. Here, students analyze the results and they also reflect on the process. Now, here's the ideal context for problem-based learning. Problem-based learning works best when students solve authentic real-world problems. Math teacher Dan Meyer warns against solving problems that contain pseudo-context, where students solve problems that don't actually reflect the way the world exists. So it's important that the problems feel real to the students. In social studies, students might broker peace in a war simulation. In math, they might determine the most efficient route for a trip. In language arts, they might figure out if a novel should be adapted into a movie. And in science, they might do a science fair project. But the key idea here is that it is not project-based learning, it's problem-based. And that's because you don't have to design a product. You're simply solving a problem. Ideally, students will solve problems that actually exist in their own world. And here's where the technology comes in. Our devices have a slew of apps that once required additional time and resources. And the problem-based learning provides a model that taps into both the connective and creative capacity of technology so that students can access the tools and the information to solve these real-world problems. So that is basically problem-based learning in less than 5 minutes.
Here are provided examples on practical application of problem-based learning.
The solar panels would kind of be spread out between the west, the east, and the south.
What's that going to do to the aesthetics, to the look of your dome? These big panels.
Well, can I show you something on the computer?
Absolutely.
Okay.
For the past several years, students in Eva Reeder's geometry class at Mount Lake Terrace High School have faced a severe challenge at the end of the school year.
Like an open, inviting area.
My students are engaged in a 5-6 week project. It's a culminating project in a regular geometry class. They bring together everything that they've learned in the geometry class and they're applying it to solve a real-world problem. And the problem that they have to solve is how do you design a state-of-the-art high school in the year 2050 on a particular site, and this is the site for this year. So you're going to leave the hills as they are?
Yeah.
What are you going to use it for?
Cross country.
Oh, so you're just going to have a bunch of paths through here?
Yeah.
Okay. Nice.
And for
Students are in teams of 3 to 4, and they're in a design competition for a contract to build it.
35 by 35 feet long. The back wall is 20 feet tall.
These are
with two 10-foot pillars.
At the end of the project, each team is required to submit a site plan for their school,
Actual area right here has 5 buildings that act
a
as
scale
steps.
model of at least one room,
The front row desk will lower down to the ground.
a floor plan, and a cost estimate for construction.
Our total cost was $86,420,122.
Teams submit a written proposal and give a final oral presentation to a team of architects who volunteer their time to judge the relative merits of the proposals.
Football field, 100 yards, 300 feet.
Reeder created this rigorous project when she realized that her students weren't able to apply what they were studying in class.
It became immediately apparent to me as a teacher that talking to kids didn't cause them to really deeply learn concepts. And they might learn the material, learn it so that they could spit back formulas and so on a paper and pencil test, but they weren't able to apply it in a context that was outside of that unit and outside of that worksheet or book page.
Why not have the whole site wall be glass facing the water?
It's when they can use what they learn in class to solve a problem that I know that they've learned the material.
We'd have doors leading to the outside classroom. So
While students must draw on their knowledge of everything from math and English to the aesthetics of design, they also learn an invaluable lesson in teamwork.
We'll see how many we can fit.
I'm thinking because
When we finally started on the site model, there was constant little squabbling about, oh, this should go there.
Just the bottom row itself just holds 1,200 people, right?
No. This entire thing holds 1,200 people.
Oh, the entire school.
They're faced with this really complex problem that has certain constraints, and they have to figure out how to begin to make the decisions and move the process forward. And how do you do that decision making within a group? These are the things that are really maybe the most powerful learnings that come from it. The real life problem solving, communication, collaboration skills.
I did learn how to work with people that didn't think the way I did, thought nonlinear, didn't believe in deadlines sort of thing. They really think out of the box, which is not like me. I'm a completely in the box kind of person. You gotta make sure you work together good.
You might be able to just kind of quickly build a little model of it.
Seattle architects Mark Miller and Kirk Wise have played a key role in the design project for the past 8 years, acting as mentors, coaches, and ultimately judges of the students' work.
there's also
A
escalators.
hugely important piece of a really effective project is to have the audience for the student work be someone outside of the classroom. So I go out into the community and I find someone who's willing to look at their work.
Which means that you use the sunlight for daylight.
The quality of student work really does go through the ceiling because they care about these architects' opinions.
These are great ideas. You're sort of dissolving the concept of a wall, dissolving this idea of indoor-outdoor.
It felt so good to do it, and to present it to architects really boosted up the confidence, and I really wanted to put an impact on them and show them all I got.
Hi, we're Max. We'll take you to the maximum.
in the beginning, we decided to start with the floor plans and the designs. Our school has one main building with 4 buildings on the side of it, was connecting with walkways. Can you guys imagine what it would be like just walking into a room and all you see is just 3 feet of wall with brick and then the rest windows even on top of you? That's what we have in our model right here.
The classroom is built down 20 feet, so the back wall is into the hill itself. The rest of the walls are made of glass. The 2 side walls are clear so you can look out and have no disruption with your view. The silver pad is a light projection, and the little white square is 360-degree hologram. This hologram is your teacher. This hologram teacher can change for your subject. If you want math, you can get Miss Reeder. If you want physics, you can get Einstein. It's all programmed in.
Education in the year 2050 is very different from the way it was at the beginning of the century. Class sizes are smaller, school budgets are much larger, and most importantly, students are taught differently. Education has become project-based.
Spending 6 weeks on a single project at the end of the school year is a bold teaching strategy, But for Reader and her students, the gamble pays off.
My colleagues ask me, how do I possibly find time for project-based learning when there are so many concepts to cover, so much curriculum to cover, and the pressure to get students ready for high-stakes tests? And my answer to them is that applied learning or project-based learning is the most effective way to deliver information, and it's the most effective way for students to understand concepts. Once they have learned a skill by having to use it, it's theirs. They don't need to cram for it on the test. It's a way of learning information that works.
Hey guys, if everybody wants to direct their attention that way, you will see the Rainier Tower.
On the final day of the class architecture project, Eva Reader's students went on a field trip to check out some of Seattle's landmark structures.
But the center of gravity for that building is a giant concrete base below the building.
But the most eagerly anticipated stop on the trip was a visit to the architectural firm of Wise Miller.
Good morning, glad you could make it.
These are sketches that we did for the high school.
The students were eager to learn about the work of these two prominent Seattle architects, but they were also anxious to find out what grades they were going to get from them on this, the final day of assessment.
And then they had the library rotating, and they made a point of saying that it needed to be larger.
The architect's judgment counts for 40% of a student's final grade for the project. It's just part of the sophisticated rubric that Reader has refined over the years.
I have to come up with ways to assess those products and performances. So I look at the site plan, I look at the perspective drawing, I read the proposal, and I have a scoring guide developed for each one of those. But I think that the most powerful assessment for this project is that provided by the architects.
And again, you will remember this activity your whole lives, and it will make a difference. What you've done is very good, and we want to recognize the best of the best.
With the moment of truth at hand, students were able to taste the thrill of winning or the agony of losing a contract.
We have three groups that we want to recognize: ADP, SK, and Max. If you'd come up.
This was also a time to celebrate the diverse inspirations and surprising talents that emerged during the course of the project.
You had a level of comfort as you presented your work. And when you know your work and you know what you're saying and you believe it, it comes through. And so we wanted your building because you were doing a good job in your presentation. We're ready for Best Architecture. Best Architecture category goes to Yin Yang. Your architectural solution was just it's almost animate.
Hearing the architect say something like, now this is a building I'd like to work together with you on. You can't duplicate that experience in a classroom.
But we really like those arms that reach down the hillside, and we could see the classroom learning going indoor and outdoor.
It's so powerful for the students because they have someone who can deeply appreciate what it is they've struggled with and gone through, and someone who can just really let them know what a fabulous job they've done.
Are we ready for the final? Best overall project for this year. I have to tell you that the winner was won by 1 point. The winner this year goes to SK. Come on up.
To hear someone honoring their ideas, that gives me chills.
Their presentation was very strong. Their educational concept was just wonderful.
All of the little details of the hassle of arranging field trips and making all this come together, it's just completely worth it.
Time to reflect. Within 5 minutes, answer the questions. What problem-based learning tasks have you already implemented? What benefits did you get from these tasks? Did you feel its advantages compared to traditional learning? Explain the difference between project-based learning and problem-based learning. time is over. For further information on this topic, please refer to these references. And now let's move on to practical application of experiential learning activities.